In this history video, students are going to draw conclusions about the usefulness of sources, identify and describe points of view, attitudes and values in primary sources, and develop texts that use evidence from sources. Have you ever looked at a website and thought, is this information useful or accurate? Another word might be reliable. Historians do the same thing. They look at historical sources and think, are they useful? Are they accurate? Historians look at many sources. They look at locations, artifacts, they talk to people, which is called oral history, and they look at documents. There are two types of sources that historians use: primary sources, which are created during the historical event being looked at, and secondary sources, which are created after the historical event. Another word for useful is reliable. When we talk about the word reliable, it means that something can be trusted or relied on, or it's dependable. So when we talk about historical sources, we are talking about the historical source being accurate, telling us the truth. It can be relied on to tell us about history, and the information in that documentation or the source is dependable. The role of a historian is to determine if a historical source is reliable. You might be asking yourself, how can a historian determine if a historical source is reliable? One way of determining the reliability of a historical source is to use the CAPE system. CAPE is an acronym. C stands for context. What was the context that the historical source was developed? A stands for ability to see. So the author of the historical source, were they able to see what they were talking about? P stands for partiality or bias. Is the document favoring one side or another in the historical event? E is expertise. Was the author of the historical source have the expertise and qualifications or experience to write or talk about that historical event? When determining context, a historian can ask, when was the source created? Where was it created? And is it a primary or secondary source? To determine if the author of the historical event had ability to see, a historian can ask, who was the creator? A historian could also ask, was the creator of the source able to see the events being discussed? To determine partiality or bias, a historian can ask, has the creator taken one side or another on the historical event? Has the creator's position been influenced by his or her context? Finally, to determine expertise, the historian can ask, was the creator of the source qualified to create the source? Let's have a look at this historical source. This is a political cartoon from 1919 after World War I. The political cartoon looks at an event called the Treaty of Versailles. It was a document created that outlined who was responsible for World War I and the consequences for the war. We can see that the context of the political cartoon was that it was published in a British newspaper in 1919. We take the information from the political cartoon and add it to our CAPE planning document. We know that the political cartoon was published in a British newspaper in 1919. We can't identify the cartoonist from the signature because it's too difficult to see and there is no other name on the cartoon. We add this information to our CAPE planning document. 3 pieces of information in the political cartoon can help us determine partiality or bias. We can see a person is being held by a giant hand. They're being force-fed with a statement that says you've got to swallow it whether you like it or not. And the people force-feeding the pill into the person's mouth are standing on a box saying big 4 pills worth millions of dollars. We add our interpretation of the political cartoon to the CAPE planning document. We can't determine the expertise of the cartoonist of this political cartoon because we can't identify a name. We also add this information to our CAPE planning document. Now that we've completed our interpretation of the political cartoon and completed the planning document, let's have a look at how we can convert it into a paragraph looking at the reliability of the historical source. The first step is to plan out the structure of our paragraph and the content. The great thing is most of this is already done using the CAPE planning document. The only thing we need to add to this is the topic sentence. In our planning document, we need to determine if we think the historical cartoon is reliable or not reliable. The second and final step is to write out our paragraph using the planning structure. I like to use colors to show that I've covered everything in my planning. I then remove all of the colors to show my final paragraph. This video has been created by Capitalize Education. At Capitalize Education, we aim to support teachers with personalized learning.